Hi guys, welcome to True Mask Games. This is, at least that's what I'm hoping, the first of a longer series of videos that will be coming out about once a month. We've had some technical issues, but hopefully they are mostly fixed so we can return to doing a few more videos once again, and maybe even occasionally running a game online. However, today, I'd like to share with you a tidbit of history that I've picked up recently that I think would make for really interesting sort of world-building prompts. I've been getting a little bit into the histories of the pre-European arrival of sort of Central and South America, and there's some really fascinating cultures in there, quite different from anything I've ever really read about. Sadly, we still don't know much about a lot of them. However, this is slowly changing. The part that I would like to share with you about is concerning the emperors of the Inca Empire. Now, at the time, shortly before their destruction in 1491, that destruction, by the way, being a hugely fascinating part of history by itself, the whole story of Hernando Pizarro and his conquistadores, but that's a bit too big and huge a topic for what's supposed to be like a short to medium length video, so we'll leave that out there. But what I was trying to say is that at the time of just before its destruction in 1491, the Inca Empire was actually the largest empire in the world. Yes, larger than Ivan the Great's Russia, larger even than Ming Dynasty China. Reading that fact by itself was something that was quite surprising for me. But there is much more. I will focus on just one facet of the Inca Empire today, which is the way that they treated their emperors. Those emperors, by the way, were called the Inca. So like each emperor was, while the people were called Inca, the emperor was the Inca. So I kind of like that. It's kind of like this idea of the personification of a people in one person. Imagine the emperor of Germany being called the German or something like that. I kind of like that. I think I'll use that in some sort of world building idea fairly soon. So the Inca emperors were, during life and after death, but we'll get to that, they were considered extremely holy. Every single thing of their person was holy. They were too holy to touch the ground with their feet, which why they had to be carried everywhere. If they spit, they didn't spit onto the ground. They actually spit into like a handkerchief or even into the hand of a retainer. And whatever they touched during the year, whatever clothes they wore, that was all gathered, and at the end of the year was burned in like a huge ceremony. When the Inca emperors died, they didn't really die. Their bodies were mummified, but the Inca believed that the emperors were still there, which of course meant that the emperors needed all their possessions because they were still alive, right? And that possessions, that included their personal belongings, their treasures, but it also included their palaces and other buildings and even their personal servants. The whole thing worked in a interesting way. Once you had this emperor mummy, basically this mummified emperor, still sitting in their palace, there was a group of priestesses, female mediums, that were believed to be able to communicate with this deceased but still around emperor guy. And they interpreted the will of this emperor, which was, as one can imagine, sometimes in contrast with the will of the living emperor. This thing became more and more interesting as the Inca Empire progressed, because for every new living emperor, there was one more dead emperor. So I believe the last emperor of the Incas had not just one or two, but was it like 11 or something? Don't quote me on that number, but a fair bunch of dead emperors that he kind of shared some of his power with. And it went that far that he couldn't even build a palace in like their capital city on the main hill because all the ground there, all the space was taken up by the palace of the dead emperors, which he of course couldn't raise or take over because they were still using them. So even assuming these mediums didn't have magic and couldn't communicate with the dead, even then That meant basically that every single dead emperor was like their own political party because they had their own servants and they were all priests who decided what they wanted to do, which basically meant every time an emperor died, another political party was added to the mix, which, as you can imagine, made things rather complicated with a lot of intrigues and schemes and things going around, which I think is a fascinating idea for this realm that has maybe a bunch of dead emperors and a living one. Of course, in fantasy worlds, we can actually give the dead emperors a will, and make them actually sort of walk around or be carried around, of course. But we could even just sort of decide that we didn't need to do that and leave it ambiguous whether the priestesses still heard the voice of the dead emperors or whether they were just sort of making things up and trying to ascertain and grab as much power to themselves as they could through this spiritual connection to a dead emperor. Of course, that also means that resources of the empire are sort of bound to the dead emperors, which encourages, I suppose, a new ruler to go out there and do some new conquests and gather his own new resources because he can't really use the ones that the dead are kind of still hogging to themselves, which I believe would encourage a strong expansionist imperialist politics, which I believe is what the Incas pretty much did. They were steadily sort of spreading along geographical lines and their abilities, for sure, which is maybe one of the reasons why their empire was fairly large. Anyway, I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea of something that you can use in your own world building as a game master. As I said, I find the whole topic quite fascinating, so I wanted to share it with you guys. As always, thank you for watching. Good luck with your own games. Until we see each other again. Bye-bye.